Is there any room that you think does a good job, or that you really are proud of the way that it came out, and you can see where your interventions made a difference?
I actually feel that way about all the period rooms. They're not perfect. Some are more perfect than others, but I feel like we have made a really strong effort to be truthful and authentic.
Do you have a favorite?
I guess I'd have to say the Ledoux room.
Why?
Oh, it's so beautiful. Ledoux was such an interesting, amazing architect, and you know, just the play of the mirrors and the door, which would have gone to the garden outside. It's so, you know, ethereal
and it's the one you can actually walk into and like really experience and see your image, you know, bounce back to you a few times. But in that one, what pieces there did you really help situate? I mean, was that a room where you did an intervention where you're like, no,
Yeah,
it has
no,
to
that
be
was
this
tough
way?
because it's got an interesting history, and fortunately we know the history. It was built for a man named Baron Osten, who was a sugar planter in Santo Domingo, and he really didn't get to enjoy it very long because he lost his head in a revolution down there. And it was bought by the Duc de Rivoli at the end of the 19th century. And he was the one who made the changes. So you know how now it's a kind of dance between light and the painted panels. And he changed it and had soubassement made that copied the motifs on the panels. And so he installed it in his house in Paris with the entire walls being covered by the panels. We even have a picture of it. And then, and it's really pretty ugly. Then it was bought by a German aristo, and again, we have pictures of it installed there in the same way. And the thing that threw us off, it was really easy to see that the soubassement panels were not of the same generation as the original panels. That was clear. But we had all these panels, and we couldn't figure out where they went, you know, because we had the dimensions of the room, and ultimately we even had an elevation of the room. And, you know, we would do things like cross sections, and, you know, on one element, like the soubassement, there would be 5 layers. And then on the real panels, there would be 8 layers, and the extra 3 being below the first one from the soubassement. The real challenge was figuring out why there were so many panels. And it took us forever, but we finally realized that they were from the bedroom on one side of the room and the dining room on the other side of the room, which explains why the wood matched, the joinery matched, the paint layers matched, everything matched. The painting, the hand of the painter, all of it was a perfect match because it was from different rooms in the same house. And so once that light went on, it was pretty straightforward.
You spoke earlier about having appreciation for furniture and decorative arts, not only for the quality and the craft of which they're made, but also like the values that they reflect of an era. So how do you engage, especially with this art that was made to show power, especially with Louis XIV's like furniture? It was a way of establishing ritual, of power, of authority, especially I mean, you're an expert in gilded objects. I mean, that is a sign of opulence and again, of power, which I think is an interesting contrast to your college experience where, you know, you were very anti-establishment.
Still am.
Yeah, so how do you relate to those objects in the sense of the significance that they clearly had in the era in which they were made?
Well, I think, I relate to them on a number of levels, and, first is technical. The way they're made is really mind-blowing. And then aesthetically, for the most part, I think they're beautiful. Sometimes they're so gaudy that they're, just kind of a joke rather than really beautiful. But another level is the story that they tell about the time when they were produced, and in French furniture, it's such a highly specialized field that, like, the mounts were not made by the cabinet maker, the gilding was not done by the person who made the frame, the upholstery was not done by the chair maker. And so when you go from the patron to the designer to the primary contractor to the subcontracts, and you get into the history of the workshop. A lot of times when a prominent furniture maker died, the widow would inherit the business. And there are many, many, many examples of one of the apprentices marrying the widow. And so you get this transmission of not just the ownership of the shop, but of the actual design and execution of the objects. So, like, there's this transmission with Jean-François Aubin and Jean-Pierre Latz, and, to say, well, is this Latz or is it Aubin? And, then there are things like there was a tax on copper from 44 to 47 or something like that. And anything that contained copper had to be stamped with a crown C, C for cuivre. So you look at that and it dates it, if you believe the stamp, which you can't always, and then brands. And there's so much more to it than the simple issue of, the excessive wealth. And I mean, even the excessive wealth, in the 18th century, one of the primary jobs of the monarch was to employ people. And you see that even today in France with these craftsmen is, their fathers and their grandfathers before them and before that, relied on work, even restoration work, from the government, because the government owns all the museums and everything, and they're the ones who, support culture in a way that Americans couldn't even dream of. And so this is really the beginning of that. And then there's the whole issue of Louis XIV surviving the revolution when he was a child, called the Fronde. And it is from that and his ongoing paranoia about being betrayed that he built Versailles, and he gathered all the nobility there to keep them distracted so that he could, run the country without being hassled by them. And, all of this opulence was absolutely part and parcel of his political regime. So I'm interested in all of that.
Mm. And it all tells a story. I feel like some people, they just walk away with the opulence and they don't dig a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, that's really missing an awful lot of interesting stuff because, yes, it's decadent and disgusting, but it doesn't stop there by a long shot. I mean, it's material culture. It's how we learn about our history. Our history is related to the French history, and I mean, we get craftsmanship from them, and not just camembert cheese, and it's how we figure out who we are.